Hi, I'm Jody Hand, Mrs. Hand Painted, and today's video I'll be showing you how to paint these really pretty Cosmo flowers. They would make a really great gift for Mother's Day if you want to make them into a painting that's a little bit larger, or stick with this 5x7 size. It would be a great size for a card as well. And there's a little blank area here. You could add a little sentiment if you wished. So paint along with me, and I hope you enjoy watching this tutorial.
All right, just for the sketching portion of this video, I sped the video up to 2 times speed. I just used a photo I found on Pinterest for reference. This is some cosmos. I'm kind of going to loosely follow this design. I liked having those two flowers coming up at the top and then kind of coming down in a diagonal. This will make a really great area left on the right-hand side to put a sentiment if you wanted to turn this into a card. And it's also very visually interesting. So I really like the picture. And I'm just kind of drawing out some loose little flower shapes of where I wanted to generally put those flowers. And I'm going to kind of stick with the color scheme. I really liked it. And I'm going to try to just kind of use that as a basis. And I'll keep the reference photo up on the screen so that you can go back and keep looking at it as we paint. And I was doing this on some Fabriano Artistico 5x7 paper, cold pressed finish. And that was a graphite aquarelle pencil or water soluble graphite from Faber-Castell. The paints I'm using today are my Mijello Mission Gold paints, and this is from the set of 36 that you can purchase. And the colors I'm using today are just kind of a mixture here of red violet, the Quinacridone Crimson Lake, rose madder, and then for my white flowers, I'm doing a mixture of ultramarine and burnt sienna to make a kind of a gray blue. And then a couple greens I'm using are Van Dyke green and Hooker's green that are in this set, and then I'm using a little bit of permanent yellow deep. So those are the colors. They're all available in the Mission Gold set of 36, and I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to purchase that same set. I really like these. They were not that expensive. I think I spent around $65 to $70, I believe, for those. So here I'm just mixing up my palette, just getting a few of my colors ready because I'm not quite sure where I want to put those flowers yet. So I just want to get my colors ready, and then I can switch back and forth and do those flowers as I need to. And I'm just mixing up my gray color here. I wanted to make this more of a gray blue, and I'm not sure why. I just washed this plate off, and I'm not really sure why everything is beading up on it. I didn't use any soap or anything, so usually it doesn't do that. So only one part of this plate is doing it and not the rest, so I'm not sure what the deal is with that. Usually I just leave the paint on my palettes, but it was just so ridiculously messy and everything was messing together, so I just decided to rinse it off. And I'm going to start out with a couple of these white flowers. Like I said, they're not really white so much, and since I have a white background, I want them to show. I'm going to do just a little bit of gray, and I'm going more on the blue side for my gray. If you don't want to do the white flowers, you want to do all pink, that would be good too. I think Cosmos also come in kind of a lavender color. You'd have to look that up. I haven't had much luck actually growing them in my own garden. It seems like I only got 3 of them to come up last year. But they do come in lots of really pretty pink and burgundy, magenta colors. So I really like this picture in particular just for that variety of pinks that was in it. And that color right there is more that red violet. And then the one on the right-hand side is the Crimson Lake. And then this is the Rose Madder that I'm getting out there. That's more of a deeper red. And I'm going to do those for the 2 that are coming up at the top. And with Cosmos, I don't know, you can't really see too well the one that was white, but what I'm doing is basically trying to follow along the way that those petals are. They're about 8 petals, 6 to 8 petals on each one, and they have little um, wavy ends on the end of their petals. So I'm just leaving a little bit of white in my petals just to give a little bit of highlight. And I might just end up going back over those a little bit more just to get that a little darker. And I'll add in my details as I go. So yeah, I'm just gonna go back over that a little bit more and make the petals a little wavy on the ends. And since this is just like a really loose flower painting, I'm not working on making every little detail of those flowers. I just want to give the impression of the cosmos that These are these really pretty flowers that are all bundled together, and I'm not going to do every little individual detail of every petal because this is not a botanical illustration. I'm not making this for seed packet art. I'm making this just for a pretty flower painting. And something simple, I mean, if you're just making this for a card, you don't want to spend hours on it. If you're making greeting cards, you don't want to dedicate 2 hours to every painting. You want to be able to do it in half an hour or 20 minutes. That's, I think my video time on this is, including my intro, is about 18 minutes. So the actual painting time, once I got my sketch done, was probably only about 15 minutes. And if you want to mix your different pinks together, do different dilutions of your paint to make them lighter or darker, try different concentrations of water and paint to make different shades of your pink. You don't need to use a lot of different paint colors because watercolor is so many different shades. When more water you add to it, the lighter it can be. And the less water, the more concentrated and pigmented it is. So you can get those really dark colors, almost not as almost opaque, but not quite. I mean, so uh, as I'm going along here, I'm figuring out a little bit easier way to do some of these petals. Just do little strokes outward from where my center is. I'm leaving that white center so I can go back and add my yellow. Some of these pink along the bottom here, I'm just kind of doing the top set of the petals because I want that to show that it's from a different height. And this one on the right that I just painted, I didn't want that to be a full round flower that's facing outward. And even when you go to your bottom half of your petals, those can be shorter than the ones on the top just to show a little bit of difference in petal size and height from where you're viewing it. And like I said, I'm not really following this picture exactly. I'm just kind of using it as a loose reference. I'm not trying to paint every single one of these flowers in there. I just want to give this as an idea and how the different colors are blended around. So I'm just using that as a loose reference guide. And you might notice I'm doing all the flowers first. I'm not putting any leaves or these buds in yet. I want to go ahead and do most of my flowers first and then go and add my foliage in afterwards because I don't want to paint flowers over top of green lines. With watercolor being transparent, you need to remember that anything you put over top, you're going to see what was below it. So if I put all of my leaves and greenery in there first and then tried to put my flowers over top, like if you were painting with acrylic or oils or other opaque paint mediums, that would cover it up. But with watercolor, you can see through. So I'm going to do all of my foliage and greenery after I've got majority of my flowers in place. And I can add in some small little flowers and petals here and there after I get that greenery in. Just want to get the main bigger details in there first before I add all those fine little leafy areas. And I'm going to go back over a couple of my red ones just to make that a little bit darker, add another layer on there. And here I'm just making some little petals that were coming out from in that darker color out from the side. So it's just that front flower is covering up another flower that's behind it. So I just want to have that kind of tucking out from behind it. And I think I'm going to go ahead and start on my centers now. I am using that permanent yellow deep that's in that set. And you may want to wait a little bit until some of those flowers are a little more dry or get a heat tool or dryer to dry that so that you don't have this yellow bleeding in. This is my biggest fault in watercolor is that I am impatient and I do not always dry in between steps when I should. So I always have things bleeding into other colors. So that's something that I need to be more conscious of. And sometimes I don't mind the way it looks if the colors bleed together. I think it looks kind of pretty sometimes in loose flower paintings. But if that's something that you do not like, make sure that this is all dry before you move on to this step. You might notice here I had a little bit of my red bleeding because those are the last two that I did, and that red is bleeding in there, and I'm just going to lift that out. So I got clean water on my brush, I wiped it off on my towel, and I'm picking up that paint and then wiping it off onto my towel. That is how I'm lifting that back, and then I can go back and add a little more yellow. It won't bleed as much, hopefully. There we go. All right, I am going to switch to a smaller brush now. I'm using, this is a size 1 round, and I'm getting some of that Van Dyke green, and I'll mix up a little bit of Hooker's green as well on my plate and kind of just mix the two together in different variations. So maybe some might be a little darker and some might be the lighter green, and just do some different shade variances, just going back and forth between the two and mixing them. If you wanted to add a little bit of yellow in there too. In my reference photo, it seemed like it was pretty dark green and very bright and vibrant. So I went with that Hooker's green that's really bright, and then brought that Van Dyke green in to give that a little deeper of a color. If you wanted to use that Hooker's green and just add some of the Ultramarine, if you're wanting to use fewer colors, that's an option. So I'm making very thin stems, and then the leaves or foliage of these flowers is very fine and just like little lines. So this is where you get a lot of freedom here because they're so fine and just haphazard that you can just kind of make little lines all over the place. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom the video in just a little bit so that you can see that a little more up close. And there, just below that one red flower, I made like an opening for where a little bud would be, and I have like almost like a little plate like with some little fern like leaves coming up, and then I'll go back and I'll add in a little bit of the pink or red to make a little flower bud. And just have your stems kind of crisscrossing across the whole bottom of the painting and add in very small, thin lines just going in different directions for that very fine uh, leaf textures that they have. Cosmos are very kind of dainty flowers. They have big blooms on the top, but then their foliage and their stems are so fine and flimsy. So if you've ever grown them in your garden and you had a strong wind or a big rain, they all flop to the ground because they're very delicate flowers. So this is a little bit of a change from if you're used to painting lots of flowers with big leaves and stems. This get to be very light-handed with your brushwork on this. Just try and make sure each one of my flowers has a stem connecting to it somewhere very fine, and then just kind of filling in leaves wherever there's a big empty place. And then I'm just stopping when I reach another flower so that I don't go over the top. If you wanted to put some of the green lines across your flowers, you could to show maybe some stems going in front. Um, I kind of wanted my flowers to be the focal point, so I didn't decide to do that, but that is something that you could do in your painting if you wanted. Have some of those leaves crossing in front, but generally I try not to overlap things because of the transparency factor. And I'm just taking a look at my reference photo and seeing like how does some of that foliage look when it gets up closer to the blooms. A lot of the leaves are a little bit further down, so I don't want to have too many of those leaves really close to the flowers. I want it to be down a little bit. So especially on those two that are kind of my focal point at the top, I had just a few little light lines coming off to the sides there. And maybe have a couple little stem or leaf pieces just kind of sticking up here and there. And I can add in a few little areas where I want to put some buds. I'm just kind of making a very wide V shape and then adding a couple extra little very thin V shapes at the top of that, you can see here. And then I'll go back in with my colors and add a little bit of color to make a bud. Right, so taking some of my random shades of pink and just making a small little semicircle type shape, just mostly dotting it in there, just to add a little bit of color for some buds. And one last little detail I wanted to add was just a little bit of that hooker's green around the outside edge, just dotting it around my yellow centers. So if you look in the picture, there is almost just a little bit of color around that that's green, or I can't really tell exactly, but I just wanted to add a little more interest to that center of the flower. And add another little bud up here. When you're getting to this point of your painting and you see if you have any big open areas in the middle of it that, hey, something needs to be there, adding little buds is a great way to fill in little areas without trying to fit a whole nother large flower head in there. So just adding little buds can really fill in some of those blank spaces if you feel like you need an additional bit of paint in an area. Here I'm going to add just a little bit more, very diluted of my pink, just to add in a little bit more. I wanted to add just the illusion of some more flowers in the background that are uh, very faint. So I've diluted that pink down quite a bit, and I'm just kind of going from the edges of what I already had there. I'm not making full flowers, just some extra petals that are kind of tucked out from behind, just to fill in a little bit. So that's another thing you can do just to fill in empty space, and maybe do some more white ones from the background. I'm just going to add in a little bit here and there that would be in the background very faint, and add a little bit of yellow to that one. And I think that looks pretty good. If you are making this for a Mother's Day gift, this would be a really pretty painting in a larger size, or if you wanted to put this in a mat and frame it, that would be a really beautiful gift. Also would make a really great card. There's a great empty place right there on the right-hand side, upper right corner, where you could write Happy Mother's Day, or if you have a stamp you could put on there as well, it would be a really great idea. Thanks for checking out my video.